What if I told you that one of the most physically gifted quarterbacks in NFL history never even cared about football? That a man with a rocket for an arm, a first overall draft pick pedigree, and a $39 million contract treated the game like an afterthought? JaMarcus Russell wasn't just a bust, he was the bust. Not because he lacked talent, not because of injuries, but because of one simple reason: he didn't care enough to try. There are plenty of NFL quarterbacks who failed. Ryan Leaf had an attitude problem. Johnny Manziel partied his way out of the league. Tim Couch got ruined by poor coaching and a terrible supporting cast. But Russell's downfall was his own laziness. Let me give you an example of just how little he cared. His coaches in Oakland suspected that he wasn't watching film, so they decided to test him. They handed him a DVD with their game plan, told him to study it, and report back the next day. When they asked him what he thought about the plays, he confidently gave his analysis. There was just one problem: the DVD was completely blank. That's JaMarcus Russell in a nutshell. Big talk, no effort, and absolutely no accountability. In this video, we're going to break down how a quarterback with Hall of Fame level tools became the biggest joke in NFL history. We'll look at his dominance in college, the warning signs that scouts ignored, his disastrous NFL career, and the stunning way it all fell apart. Was JaMarcus Russell the laziest player in football history? Let's find out. Before JaMarcus Russell became the NFL's biggest cautionary tale, he was a football prodigy. A 6'6", 265-pound quarterback with a cannon for an arm, he looked like he was built in a lab to dominate the NFL. Coaches, scouts, and analysts all believed he was the next great quarterback, the type of player who could redefine the position. But to understand why so many people believed in him, we have to go back to the beginning. JaMarcus Russell was a phenomenon at Williamson High School in Mobile, Alabama. He was unstoppable, throwing for over 10,000 yards in his high school career, an Alabama state record. He was big, strong, and had a ridiculous arm, able to launch the football 70 yards with ease. But there was one major red flag that would follow him his entire career: work ethic. Even in high school, there were whispers that Russell relied too much on his natural talent, often skipping workouts and coasting through practices because he was simply better than everyone else. Still, his talent was undeniable, and he committed to LSU, where he would take his game to the next level. When JaMarcus Russell arrived at LSU, he was raw but electric. His first couple of seasons were inconsistent, but by 2006, he had put it all together. He led the Tigers to an 11-2 record, finishing his junior season with over 3,100 passing yards, 28 total touchdowns, and just 8 interceptions. Then came the 2007 Sugar Bowl, the game that would change everything. Against Notre Dame, Russell looked unstoppable. He threw for 332 yards and 2 touchdowns, ran for another, and made the Irish defense look helpless. One play, in particular, sent NFL scouts into a frenzy. Russell rolled to his right, shrugged off a defender like he was a rag doll, and launched a pass 50 yards downfield with the flick of his wrist. It was magic. And it was the exact kind of play that made NFL teams believe he was a generational talent. After that game, the hype machine went into overdrive. Scouts ignored concerns about his work ethic, his weight, and his inconsistency because they were mesmerized by his arm. Legend has it that at his pro day, Russell threw a 70-yard bomb from his knees, a throw that had absolutely zero practical use in a football game. But to NFL decision-makers, it didn't matter. They were in love. Hall of Fame coach John Gruden was one of his biggest believers, calling him the best college quarterback I've ever seen. ESPN analyst Mel Kiper Jr. doubled down. 3 years from now, you could be looking at one of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL, period. By the time draft night rolled around, Russell was the obvious #1 pick. JaMarcus Russell had the size, the arm, and the hype. But what he didn't have was work ethic, and the signs were there long before he ever set foot in the NFL. In hindsight, Russell's failure wasn't surprising at all. In fact, anyone who looked beyond the highlight reels and workout videos could see it coming. Coaches, teammates, and even some scouts knew there were red flags. But the allure of his talent was too strong, and those warning signs were ignored. At LSU, Russell was known for being laid back, maybe too laid back. His talent was so overwhelming that he could get away with cutting corners. Former teammates recalled that Russell rarely put in extra work. He wasn't the type to study film late at night or obsess over perfecting his mechanics. When practice was over, JaMarcus was done. No extra throwing sessions, no deep dives into the playbook. He was was good enough without trying, and that was a dangerous mindset for someone about to enter the NFL. LSU's coaching staff also saw the warning signs. His weight was always an issue, fluctuating wildly between 250 and 280 pounds during his college years. At times, he looked like a tight end rather than a quarterback. The team nutritionists and strength coaches tried to keep him in check, but Russell simply didn't take it seriously. His own college head coach, Nick Saban, once told a scout that Russell had no work ethic. But by the time Russell declared for the draft, the NFL Combine is where teams evaluate not just talent, but character and discipline. And this was where Russell's flaws started to show. If anyone was paying attention, coaches noticed that Russell struggled to explain plays and seemed disinterested in the X's and O's. While other top QBs like Brady Quinn and broke down coverages in detail, Russell's responses were vague and unimpressive. At the Combine, he checked in at 265 pounds, but by his pro day, he was already creeping closer to 280. Yet none of it mattered because his arm was so spectacular. The scouts who saw him throw ignored everything else. Heading into the 2007 NFL Draft, some teams were concerned about Russell's work ethic, but the Raiders weren't one of them. Al Davis saw the arm talent and nothing else mattered. Some within the Raiders organization, including head coach Lane Kiffin, tried to warn Davis. They believed Russell lacked discipline, wasn't a great leader, and wasn't committed enough to be the face of the franchise. But Davis dismissed the concerns, believing that Russell's arm strength alone would make him elite. The Raiders had fallen in love with a fantasy, and they were about to pay the price. On draft night, as JaMarcus Russell walked onto the stage, holding up his Raiders jersey, he had already won. He was now a millionaire. He had made it, and that was the problem. For JaMarcus Russell, the work was over before it had even begun. By the time JaMarcus Russell was drafted first overall in 2007, he was already in danger of becoming a bust. The warning signs were there: poor work ethic, weight concerns, and a lack of leadership. But the Oakland Raiders ignored them all. They believed in his once-in-a-generation arm talent. It was supposed to be the beginning of a new era for the Raiders. Instead, it became one of the biggest financial mistakes in NFL history. Russell wasn't just bad, he was historically awful, and it didn't take long for the cracks to start showing. Most rookie quarterbacks sign their contracts quickly and get to work. Russell, he didn't even show up. For months he held out, refusing to report to the team until the Raiders caved to his contract demands. His holdout lasted all the way into September, meaning he missed training camp, preseason, and the first game of the regular season. By the time he finally signed his contract and arrived in Oakland, he was already behind. Raiders head coach Lane Kiffin was furious. He knew quarterbacks needed time to develop, and Russell had already lost valuable reps. But when he finally did report, he showed up overweight. He was supposed to be the future of the franchise, but instead, he was a 265-pound rookie who didn't know the playbook and was weeks behind the rest of the team. Still, the Raiders tried to be patient. They didn't rush him onto the field in 2007, letting him sit and learn behind veteran Josh McCown. When he finally made his first start in Week 17, it was clear he wasn't ready. 2008 was supposed to be Russell's breakout year, but it was a disaster from the start. Reports surfaced that Russell was pushing 290 pounds in the offseason. Coaches regularly found Russell sleeping during team meetings. Instead of owning up to his struggles, he blamed his teammates and avoided criticism. The Raiders had no choice but to start him anyway. They had spent too much money on him to let him sit. The results? Only 2,400 passing yards, 13 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and a 5-10 record. It wasn't great, but it wasn't a complete disaster. The Raiders hoped he would improve. Instead, he got even worse. By his third season, Russell had completely fallen apart. His weight had ballooned to over 300 pounds. He showed no leadership and barely communicated with teammates. His performance on the field was embarrassing. He finished 2009 with just 3 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, and a 50 passer rating, one of the worst seasons ever for a starting quarterback. By Week 10, he was benched in favor of Bruce Gradkowski. By May 2010, he was released. JaMarcus Russell had gone from first overall pick to out of the NFL in just 3 years. And the worst part? He didn't even seem to care. JaMarcus Russell wasn't just a bust. He was the biggest waste of talent the NFL had ever seen. But what happened next was just as shocking. Because after his football career ended, his life began to spiral even further out of control. By the time JaMarcus Russell was cut by the Raiders in May 2010, his NFL career was effectively over. He had played just 31 games, thrown more more interceptions than touchdowns, and burned through $39 million in guaranteed money, all while showing no effort to improve. Weight had always been an issue for Russell, but once he was out of the NFL, it got completely out of control. By 2011, reports surfaced that Russell was tipping the scales at 320 pounds, almost 60 pounds heavier than his rookie year. The once promising quarterback looked more like an offensive lineman than a signal caller. Former teammates later recalled that Russell barely worked out and had a terrible diet, even when he was in the NFL. His go-to drink? Codeine syrup mixed with soda, a drink commonly known as purple drank or lean. The effects of his poor conditioning showed on the field, but he never seemed to care. Raiders players noticed that he would walk into the facility eating fast food, while his teammates were prepping for games. One former coach put it bluntly, it wasn't just that he didn't work hard, it was like he actively avoided it. Even after his disastrous stint with the Raiders, Russell still believed he could get another shot in the NFL. In 2013, he started training for a comeback. He even lost weight, dropping from 320 pounds to around 265. He worked with a personal trainer and tried to prove to teams that he was serious about football, but the league had moved on. Russell reached out to multiple teams, hoping for a tryout. JaMarcus Russell wasn't just a bad quarterback, he was a case study in wasted potential. His career is the ultimate cautionary tale, a reminder that in the NFL, talent means nothing without work ethic. For years, NFL teams had believed that arm strength was everything. If a quarterback could throw the ball 70 yards with ease, they could figure out the rest later. Russell's career proved how wrong that mindset was, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how big your arm is if you never watch film. JaMarcus Russell's downfall changed the way NFL teams evaluate quarterbacks. Before him, teams fell in love with physical traits, big arms, big bodies, raw athleticism. After him, they started looking at mentality just as much as ability. Since Russell, we've seen teams ask more questions about a quarterback's character and work ethic before drafting them. Scouts look for an ability to study film, a willingness to improve, and being able to handle the pressure of being a leader. If JaMarcus Russell had even a fraction of that mindset, he could have been one of the greats. JaMarcus Russell's story is infuriating because it could have been so different. He had every tool needed to be great, but instead of working hard, he took his money and coasted. Now, I want to hear from you. Was JaMarcus Russell the biggest bust of all time, or does someone else take that crown? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another football story.